What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 170 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about yet another Martian Manhunter book. This is the Martian Manhunter Showcase, Volume 1. This collects the first few years of the Martian Manhunter's appearances in the mid to late 1950s in the Detective Comics series. And I was expecting one thing from this book, and I didn't really get that, but what I did get, I was not disappointed by. I really enjoyed it, and that kind of surprised me. What I was expecting from this book was John Jones pretends to be a human detective, John Jones, in some unnamed city, and then while he's doing that, on the side, he is publicly superheroing as the Manhunter from Mars, and everyone sees him as a superhero, and they know he's from Mars, and he's fighting science fiction-y threats on the side. And that's not really what you get here. The first half of this book, nobody knows that there is a Martian living among them. Is John Jones using his Martian abilities secretly in his human disguise to fight crime and solve mysteries in the police department. And then about halfway through this book, he gets sprayed by this chemical that doesn't allow him to use his Martian abilities while he is invisible. So if he wants to continue using his powers to save people and fight crime, he has to do it publicly as a Martian. And everyone finds out, hey, there's a Martian living among us. And then they don't really react how you would think they would react in a modern context in the 1950s. Basically, everyone was okay with a Martian living among them, and nobody thought that he was evil or he was the front runner of an invasion or anything like that. But then the second half of this book, you get to see the Martian Manhunter doing pretty mundane things. He doesn't really fight anything super out there or weird or unusual or anything like that. There is an evil robot at one point. There is an evil Martian that he fights at one point that I already mentioned. There's different stuff like that, but nothing really out there. And part of that is because most of the issues collected here are only 6 issues long, or 6 pages long, rather. The first issue here is actually a Batman story that is completely unrelated to John Jones, but it introduces a character who I assume we never saw again, and that character is called the Manhunter from Mars. And then they collect that here, and then the next issue they collect here is completely unrelated to that character, and it introduces John Jones. And then most of the issues here are only 6 pages long, so they don't have a whole lot of space to introduce lots of really good villains or lots of really interesting science fiction-y concepts. Basically, any premise that they introduce in that issue, they have to deal with it pretty quickly. And that makes it really easy to read through this book. I burned through this book, no pun intended, very fast because almost all of the issues here were 6 or 7 pages long. Whenever you have another book like this from around this time period, for example, the Supergirl Showcase, it took me a lot longer to read that because most of the issues collected inside were a lot longer. And so it was a little bit more tedious reading through that book than it was this one. With this one, you get a lot of repetition. I can't tell you how many times the opening page of an issue in this book would say, normally the Martian Manhunter fights crime, but in this issue, for some weird reason, he's fighting with crime. We get that like 3 or 4 times. You get a lot of repetitive plots here, but it's not boring or difficult to read through. Like I said, I went through this really fast. It was really easy to read and really fun to read. Like I said, this wasn't really what I expected, but what I got wasn't bad. I ultimately really enjoyed this book. I am very curious about Volume 2, which I do not have, unfortunately, but I am interested in reading that because I have heard that a lot of the more out there science fiction-y threats that the Martian Manhunter will fight are introduced in that volume. And I can believe it because the last few issues in this book are about 12 issues or 12 pages long instead of only 6 or 7 pages long. So whenever you get into Volume 2, if you do decide to read Volume 2, chances are you will like some of the characters and subplots that are introduced in that volume a little bit more than you will like them here because each issue has a little bit more space to explore those characters and subplots. Here, they will introduce something, and then before you know it, they have to wrap it up and then move on to the next issue. And it's a little jarring at times. At one point, Jean rescues this dog, and then the whole premise of that issue is that the dog is following Jean around because he likes Jean, and then he's accidentally messing up this case that Jean is working on. And then at the end of that issue, Jean says, okay, I'm going to keep this dog, I'm going to name him Saturn. And then we never see that dog again. And then the same thing happens. There is a human girl. She is on the police force. She is the commissioner's daughter. Her name is Diane Mead. She is introduced in an issue basically in the same way as the dog. She tags along with Jean on every case that he goes on, and he's not able to use his Martian superpowers in front of her. And then we don't see her again for like 10 or 15 issues. It's a really long time before we see her again. And then when they do finally bring her back, they keep her around for a while. She appears in many issues in a row. She's not just discarded again like she was the first time. But the dog, we never see him again after he's introduced. And Diane Mead, it takes a really long time for them to bring her back. So that's a little bit jarring if you're reading this in sequential format like I was. But other than that, I really enjoy this book a lot. If you are a fan of the goofiness of the Silver Age, I would highly recommend that you check this book out. If you are one of those people who you don't necessarily think that Jean works well in a solo setting, and you think he only works as part of the Justice League, I would recommend giving this a shot. At least read a few issues here and there. Maybe take your time with it. I wouldn't recommend just blowing through it really fast like I did. You might get really tired of it if you do that, because not everyone is going to enjoy this as much as I did. But if you think that Jean doesn't work with the Justice League and you want to be proven wrong, then I would recommend this book. I think that this is a very good example of how a modern-day Martian Manhunter series could work if handled in a little bit more of a modern fashion. So those are my thoughts on the Martian Manhunter Showcase Volume 1. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.